maybe pick up on things that might be otherwise overlooked. And one of those things for myself was sort of this going from a position of feeling invincible and nothing can ever happen to me, nobody can hurt me, kind of thing on the male side, to having to learn, as a woman, having to learn how to sort of watch out for myself and how to be more attuned to the fact that it really is very easy to be a victim.
It can be very scary.
It is very scary, and it's something that in the beginning it took me a while, and I know this is something I've heard before, in our circles. It took me a while to sort of learn that I have to be careful now. Not that men aren't abused; they certainly are, but I've had to learn to be much more careful and much more sort of situationally aware and sort of come to realize that it really is very easy now for me to become a victim.
Yeah.
And you were talking about this sort of in relationships. What is no? What is no? What is yes? And one of the things that I did learn, I don't want to go off on too big a tangent here. One of the things that I did sort of come to realize in experiencing relationships post-transition is how hard it really is to say no to a man. Men can be extremely forceful, and that doesn't necessarily. I'm not saying that there's something wrong with men necessarily. They sort of testosterone makes them that way. I know, but men can be very forceful, and it's very hard as a woman sometimes to say no. They really. I don't want to say that I was abused by any of my relationships, although I was in one that made me feel a bit like it was pretty close to it. A man who really was extremely forceful and didn't like to hear no very much, but it's sort of that perception was kind of a surprise for me. It was sort of a new experience. It's like. It really is very difficult sometimes to say no, and it's very. I found myself in exactly that position, wondering afterwards. Was that what I really wanted, or was I just not making myself clear? And it really was kind of an interesting. I don't want to say interesting, but it's been sort of a learning experience for us and for myself certainly.
And the strength that we have now, than what we used to have is quite different. I mean, fighting off a male before was, about even, but
not anymore.
As a female, it's much more scary.
And I think that's sort of the other side of, so we have all these, we talked about sort of the expectations that we have for boys and for young men in our society. The other expectation, the other side of that, is that for young girls, we expect girls not to enjoy sex. We expect girls to not say no. We expect girls, part of what we learn as young women or as adult women is sort of that how you become more feminine is to become more submissive to men, and how men prove their masculinity is to be more dominant in some ways. So
more submissive and more sexual.
Right, and so we sort of have that. So I mean, part of which is really horrible, but part of the experience probably of being a woman in our society is exactly that: is you are not safe, and you're sort of made acutely aware of that very quickly. So I think that's absolutely something that's hugely important to sort of to think about, and the experience of that.
Yeah, and if we think about how our society has conversations about ending sexual violence, they're very focused on how a woman should behave. Well, women shouldn't, let somebody else buy them a drink. If you go to the bathroom, you should have your friend sit there with their hand over your drink so nobody puts a drug into it. You shouldn't wear certain clothes. You shouldn't go to certain parts of town. You shouldn't go out at night. And there's this whole laundry list of things that women can't do because they're women and they're vulnerable. And if they do these things, clearly they were asking for it. And it's so interesting to speak to people who are very well intentioned and say, well, I'm so committed to ending sexual violence. And what do I tell my daughters? How do I talk to my daughters about this? And I say, you don't talk to your daughters. You talk to your sons. You need to talk to your sons about. What does it mean to respect your partner? What does it mean to respect other people's boundaries? And I mean, there are conversations that we need to have with boys and girls. It's not enough to make it sort of this completely binary thing. We're like, okay, like girls get this talk and boys get this talk. But to really open up the conversation to, you know, it's not up to a woman to prevent her assault. That, you know, if a woman's extremely drunk and wearing next to nothing and in a terrible neighborhood, you know, at some ungodly hour of the night, and she doesn't run into a rapist, she's going to get home fine. Whereas, you know, there are women who can dress very modestly and be stone cold sober at noon and encounter a rapist, and that situation plays out very differently. So, I mean, no matter how you look, the variable that causes a sexual assault is the presence of an offender. It has nothing to do with any of the behaviors of a victim. But in a way, it almost feels better for us to believe that, because then we can say, oh, well,
it's in my control.
If I dress a certain way, if I'm careful of where I go, if I don't leave my drinks out on the table, I'm going to be safe. It's really hard for us to admit that, you know, the people who are going to hurt me, you know, in an overwhelming, something like 90% of cases, the people who are going to hurt me are the people who I already know, who I've already let into my home, the people who I trust, the people who I care about. And we don't want to believe that, so we say, well, I wore my turtleneck today, so I'm safe. Like, you know, it's this sort of invincibility cloak that, you know, I did all of the right things. You know, and the flip side of that is that when we see people who have been assaulted, we say they must have done something wrong. You know, they obviously didn't have the skills or the ability to keep themselves safe. We never look to the offender and say, you know, that person made a decision to hurt somebody else.
Does that hold true in most cases?
The statistics that we have from our programs say about 90% of victims knew their offender prior to the assault.
I'd say something that complicates that a little bit is even sort of what you're hinting at, which is that a lot of times we're put in positions where, like, we, in particular, I know a lot of trans kids that talk about the fact that they have no one in their lives that are close to them. So they want to basically, anybody who's willing to be close to them, to show them love, to sort of show them attention, they're willing to let that happen, whatever that looks like. And so I think there can be added complications, not as simply as sort of, because you have to figure out negotiating all of your boundaries and also wanting somebody to desire you and wanting somebody to pay attention to you and that kind of stuff.
Sort of a false closeness in order to obtain access to the victim.
Right, so it's always just in terms of sexual violence, it's not always as sort of cut and dry in some ways as we like to sort of think about it, or as Law and Order likes to make it. For many of us at least.
Now, to take off a point that you had mentioned, what I've been hearing and what I've read before, and I guess what I want to sort of see if I can summarize, is that most offenders choose their victim through opportunity. It's not something that's planned out and, you know, okay, on Saturday I'm going to, you know, that seems to be the what I'm hearing is the whole notion that you were talking about you know, not being safe. It's like, it seems like victims are you know, in large part, it's sort of a crime of opportunity. You have an offender. You know, there's somebody that, you know, you talked about being marginalized on the edge of society. I think I can get away with that one. Opportunity presents itself. That seems to be what I'm hearing. It's not, you know, especially like you were saying with people you know, the whole sort of notion of a date rape. I wonder how many date rapists plan to rape on the, you know, when they get ready to go out, or if they find their date's just a little too drunk and take advantage of the opportunity and victimize them.
And there are some studies, particularly around alcohol, because that's an area that very few people are comfortable discussing. It's one of those areas where we're really quick to say, well, she drank too much, well, he drank too much. And that there are a number of studies that focus on fraternities and sororities in relationship to their alcohol consumption. And there's some, I mean, again, sexual assault looks like all kinds of things, but there's some research to suggest that, you know, within those settings, that is how some people sort of find their opportunities, as they sort of survey the scene and say, okay, who's drunkest? Who, you know, who can I have sort of the easiest, like, physical access to? And I mean, complicating that again is who won't be believed if they call the police, who, whose friends are going to say, well, sweetie, you don't hold your liquor. So, and that's really hard to think that, there's a sense in which, every single one of us kind of creates these opportunities for offenders because we repeat these myths, because we push people to the margins.
Right.
Okay, I got to tell you, we are actually out of time. But but please, thank you so much for coming, and please come back. I think we've just sort of scratched the surface here, and I would love to have you guys come back and talk to us some more, and do a future show if you could. Not to put you on the spot, but we would love to have you back. But thank you so much for coming, and I believe we've got your number up there, and we will try to get your information linked on our website so that people can get you from there. Right.
Thank you so much.
I can sit around and point my finger all day. All that happens